Good. Okay.
Moti, what do you call that headpiece you have on there, boy?
Well, boy, actually, this is supposed to be a Sikh headpiece, but I
Oh,
think it looking
okay.
little African, so I put it
I
on.
see. Uh-huh. All right. Yeah. Yes, it can pass.
All
But Mochi, I didn't want to say anything, but I thought
No.
you had a headache.
I saw the most.
You could count on Heather to make a
right.
interjection.
Yes, and attacks. Girl, just all right.
The recording is in progress. Okay, so one
Good
moment.
afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Cassie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, we're about to start. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us with Poetry and Prose. It is the 4th of August, 2024, and this is our Emancipation Celebration meeting. Today, we have a full house and lots of readings for you. So we're going to start off with Natasha Greer. She's going to be reading from a talented Trinidadian author. And Natasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So my piece is from Ibadan to Heliard, excerpt 1. Soon, the carnival celebrations drew near. Carnival was taboo for Billy's parents, but he was excited to fully experience life in the dry river. Ruth, Cap, Hamil, and Billy all agreed to join the Heliard band. On the night of the Cambule, Billy found himself venturing into the heart of the yard for the very first time. Most villagers already knew his name, and they all wanted to take a drink with Ruth's boyfriend. As Billy obliged, looking around, his eyes widened in amazement at the grandeur of the costumed crowd. Each individual, including Ruth, Cap, and Hamil, had metamorphosed into their preferred embodiment of villainy. Indians, robbers, devils, imps, vampires, mummies, and even matadors. Amongst the throngs, a few men boldly chose to masquerade as women, their flamboyance adding another area of intrigue to the already overwhelming spectacle. For Billy, it was a sight unlike he had ever seen, and his cowboy costume left him feeling out of place amidst the revelry. Billy was unfamiliar with some of the more enigmatic characters and turned to Hamil, eager for an explanation. "What are those costumes about?" he asked. Hamil replied, "Them is the characters from back in slavery. Them dragging the chains, wearing locks and keys, and carrying the pitchforks is the Jab Molassie. The man speaking funny over there is the midnight robber, reminding us of how them masters used to talk. If you see someone with diamond mirrors on their costume, they granting access to the ancestors. The one with the big heart-shaped panel on his chest, he here to suck up all the evil spirits. And them on stilts is the Moko Jumbi, the spirit of Africa flying high and watching over we. Them costumes all represent we history over here." With Hamil's explanation, a veil lifted, and Billy's eyes sparkled with excitement. He knew this night would be unforgettable. As the evening wore on, and the air was charged with indulgence and spirits, Billy felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Not long after, the Tambu Bamboo Band, complete with their bamboo sticks, drums, and old iron kettles, began their parade through town. As they played, Billy was swept up in the intoxicating combination of music and camaraderie. This was his first Kambuli, but there were moments when the experience felt uncannily familiar. There was a captivating energy to the pulsating rhythms and the people that Billy instantly connected with. As they all danced and enjoyed themselves, he felt invigorated and at home. As Billy observed the procession, he could not help but notice the tension rose whenever they made their way through certain parts of town or passed by the mounted police. This puzzled him, and though he quickly adapted to the pattern, he couldn't understand why. The question gnawed at him as he soaked up the vibrant energy of the festivities. Could it be connected to Helyard and the Kambule ritual? Were there deeper, more mystical forces at work that only those in tune with the spirits could sense? Or was he just simply drunk and seeing things? And that was from Ibadan to Helyard by Mr. Stuart Fortuny. Thank you, sir, for allowing us to read your awesome work.
Thank you so much for reading. And yes, Stuart Fortney is someone to look out for. I read the book and I thought it was quite an interesting story. Any comments?
Gersh, as you read the book, you could tell us a little about Billy. What did Billy transform into any costume later on?
Billy transformed into quite a lot. It's really his journey
All right.
and what he managed to do. He was the center of the story, and he brought the poniard and the I don't want to give too much away. He brought it back. So it turned out in the story he had ties to the original founders. And one thing in the story that I thought was quite interesting, at least I always grew up thinking Pan started from using the oil drums. And in the story, the Pan started using biscuit tins. So I don't know if that was an element perhaps early.
No, that biscuit tin, we know of that. Crazy used the biscuit tin one time in one of his calypsos, and ting-a-ling-a.
Yes, so the story really went about with that. He started with the biscuit tins, and then it talked about the conflict between the early pan players and the police. And so it's quite an interesting story. I don't want to give too much away because I want you guys to support him and definitely read it. It's quite an interesting story. We wanted to have him on as author of the month, but unfortunately conflicts didn't allow that to happen. We'll go ahead now with, if there are no other comments, we'll go ahead now with Leslie Ann. She'll be treating us to part 2. And thank you for that reading, Natasha. It was quite, I love to hear Natasha read. Oh,
Part 2. Months later, Fair, impressed by Officer Faker's loyalty and ability to get things done, orchestrated his promotion to captain. Together, they sought to put an end to all Camberley activities and found an unlikely ally in Archbishop Nugent, who saw black behavior as heretical perversity opposed to the purity and integrity of the Catholic faith. Jackson was not one to be silenced or tyrannized. He realized that despite their emancipation, their feelings and culture were gradually becoming oppressed once more. as Sally recounted. Jackson saw the big picture and was more determined and strategic in his fight. In his first attempt to test the metal, Jackson led Hilliard into town, but they were caught off guard, badly beaten, and arrested. This only fueled Jackson's fury and determination to fight back. As Sally said with a fierce expression, "And I wasn't letting that one go. You can't beat my son like that. They almost killed him." The following year, Jackson again led Hilliard into town. This time, however, they made sure to come prepared, lining the dark streets with bottles and stones. When Captain Faker and his men approached, I called out, "Mysterious Captain Faker, et tout l'homme au coeur de la rue," Sally said with a chuckle. And with that, Hilliard charged forward, attacking with full force. We sent a serious message, and Captain Faker and his men had to make a bloody retreat. That night was sweet, and the Cambulet was unforgettable. Billy, captivated by Sally's retelling of the story, hung on to every word as if he himself had lived through the experience. The following year, Pay and his accomplices took things to a whole new level, even going as far as bringing British warships into the Gulf to intimidate Jackson and the Hilliard community. Adam and I moved over the hill as the police presence in town was overwhelming, and with the authorities now armed with new guns, Jackson's options were severely limited. The police force and government fought with all their might, passing new laws that outright banned torch processions, drumming, dancing, and even musical performances before dawn on Carnival Monday. And it wasn't just the town that felt the impact of these restrictions, as there were bloody battles taking place in the central and southern parts of the island, with many masqueraders losing their lives to colonial police. Following those horrific massacres, new figures emerged, including Archbishop Law and Col Blake. But everyone knew that it was Pay who was truly pulling the strings, shamelessly using the police, the church, and the lawmakers as mere pawns to oppress us, Sally said, with tangible fury in her voice. As the new century dawned, the upper crust of society, shielded by the watchful eye of the mounted police, began venturing into the streets, dressed in their most elaborate pretty mask carnival costumes. It was essentially a modern-day rendition of the traditional Mardi Gras celebrations that once took place on the plantation grounds. The location had changed, however, and now the revelers tripped around town, with the elders referring to it as their new plantation. Sadly, Halliard was kept off of the streets and forced to celebrate Camberley in the slit of the dry river bed and over the hill. The two places where even the law feared to tread, having been subject to violent stonings over the years. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading. Leslie Ann, let me just get, there we go. Any comments?
Always a pleasure. You know, Leslie Ann and Natasha, you're always so good to have them on the program and so good to hear them read. I always enjoy listening to Leslie Ann and Natasha.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to have them. And that part in the book really talked about how the police, they wanted to come out in the streets to, you know, play pan and stuff, and they pushed them back into the Halliard. So they had to celebrate there. So it was really about his journey and the battle to get this started and community started. I thought it was excellent showing from a local author. Thank you so much for reading. Okay, we'll move on to our next reader, Heather Ferguson, Latu Ferguson. She is reading Black Pharaohs for us, an original piece. Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I wrote this poem for African Emancipation Day in Trinidad. It's called Black Pharaohs. Africans in all their tribal designs held the secrets to binary codes, the precursors to computers. The Black Pharaohs of the Kush set the pattern of culture later copied by the Egyptians. Mali had the world's first university, and the Yoruba of Nigeria had the original plan for the democratic foundation of government, copied by the Greeks and now embraced by the West into the present day. The rape of Africa was real. The bronzes of Benin, taken to England. The diamonds of South Africa, blood diamonds. The obelisks of Egypt in the British Museum. And 12.5 million humans ripped from its shores to cross the Middle Passage. So-called champions of Africa, men like Cape Colony Prime Minister Cecil Rhodes, believed in English superiority. Anthropologist George Reisner doubted the strength of the Nubian Empire. Historian Will Durant said Africa had no artistic culture. Even missionary Albert Schweitzer segregated Black and white workers at his dinner table. These men could not shake their racist views that put the Black man down far beneath their white counterparts, putting Black men in chains. Slavery is not a thing of the past. It lives on in the entitled, the greedy, the prejudiced, and even in the so-called do-gooder. The physical shackles may have been ripped off almost 200 years ago, but fetters in the human psyche still remain. Emancipation did little to dispel the lies and injustices of slavery. It left a lasting scar upon the psyche and people torn away from the continuity of culture and identity. It changed the writing on the page of those who came after, resonating far into the future, vibrating in tandem with their heartbeats. The lost memory of the door of no return reverberating, buried deep in the psyche of slave descendants through time, into perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. What a powerful piece. Beautiful read. And any comments?
Somebody talking about rape of Africa, somebody said they had to travel from England to Egypt to see the pyramids, mainly because the British couldn't find a way to bring the pyramids into England. So that's one thing they didn't rape.
But they took the obelisks and they put them on their side and they floated them there, so they took what they could.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ed. I like your word choices and your language there, man.
Thank you.
They spoke to the gold, and I think there's a calypso where the verse is the gold from Africa. I like how you spoke about the origins and what came there. And I think you used the word ripped from Africa. Yeah, I think I heard it twice in your piece there, and I found that original because people hardly use that word ripped when talking about the enslaved, and how the slaver dealt with the enslaved, ripped from their homeland, so to speak. So
well,
overall,
there's a Trinidad writer called Dion Brand from Guaygarari, but she's living in Toronto now. She went to Naparima Girls High School in San Fernando, but she's an excellent writer, and she wrote about the door of no return and how that indelible mark remains to the descendants even to this day. It's something that they don't know about, but it's in their psyche, because once you took people out of Africa and you changed their culture, there was really no going back. They could create a new culture, but there was no going back to that original culture that they had. So you created a different people, so to speak. So that is what the door of no return means.
Apart from the metaphorical meaning, I think there's an actual place in Ghana, I believe,
yes,
where that door of no return exists, and I believe people are normally taken there to view, the passage there. you know, because it's a kind of a long passage, you know, chains, and people have to wait there until the slaver came and that sort of thing. And then you use
That's right.
you use the word scars also, you know,
Yes.
yeah, in your piece there. So yeah, right on. Thank you very much, Ella.
Cassie, always a great critique coming from you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All righty, and we talk about the origins of slavery, but there was a long journey to emancipation, and we have Frank Mohan reading The Long Journey to Emancipation Day by Angelo Bissessa Singh, and he's a local historian and author. Frank?
So I discovered Angelo Bissessa Singh by joining the virtual museum that is run on Facebook, that is run by his aunt, Patricia Bissessa Singh. And apparently I think most of you would know him, Angelo Bissessa Singh. He was a prolific author, historian, and a columnist. And his latest book was Visual Glimpses, among many others. And, you know, he died very young of pancreatic cancer back in 2015 at the age of 34. And as I will read a little quote from his obituary. Angelo possessed a gift whereby he told the story of our nation, a story of diverse people and culture brought together by accident, brought by sugarcane. He taught us to love ourselves and protect each other. And if we want to preserve his legacy, we must put in place funds to preserve our heritage. So he wrote a short piece, what the enslaved conditions were like for enslaved Africans on the sugarcane plantations of Trinidad and Tobago. So Emancipation Day, August 1st, marks the same day in 1834 when slavery was officially banned in all of the British colonies. While it's an opportunity for celebration, it's also a time to remember the painful experiences of our enslaved African ancestors and reflect on their long, bitter road to freedom. So life on the plantations brought its own set of demands, hazards, hardships, regarding not only labor, but also quality of food, clothing, and shelter received. Tobago, however, was different from Trinidad in that its enslaved Africans had no significant French heritage, and thus was subjected to the brutalities of British plantocracy subjugation. Whereas slave trading in Trinidad was largely on a peer-to-peer basis, Tobago is known to have had a slave auction market square in Scarborough, where hapless victims of the flesh trade were hawked to planters like cattle. Some enslaved people resisted rebellion or trying to escape. In this respect, Tobago also differs from Trinidad in that, unlike the latter, which only counted one insurrection and one stillborn plot in La Quesa Valley, Tobago had several violent slave rebellions in 1770, 71, and 1774. This may have had the effect of making slavery conditions in that island all the harsher. Still, there were some general similarities in the conditions of slavery in Trinidad and Tobago, which were until 1889 separate territories. The following is an excerpt from an article, Captives' Experience and Resistance to Enslavement. This is the excerpt. On the plantation, enslaved people continued their harsh existence as growing sugar was grueling work. Gangs of enslaved people consisting of men, Women, children, and the elderly worked from dawn to dusk under the orders of the overseer. Arriving for work at dawn, enslaved people only stopped for rest and food at breakfast and lunchtime, after which they worked until nightfall. After returning to their living quarters, they would often still have chores to do before going to bed. Arriving for work at dawn, enslaved people only stopped for rest and food at breakfast and lunchtime, after which they worked till nightfall. After returning to their living quarters, they would often still have chores to do before going to bed. Now, on the plantations, enslaved people lived in small huts on the estate. These were constructed in the cheapest manner possible of tapia or woven bamboo walls with cane trash or carrot thatch roofs. At least one pre-emancipation village is believed to have survived into the 20th century at Bog Congo, which was on the lands of the La Paix estate in Chatham. Bog Congo is now an abandoned place, with the last person who remembered it as a settlement dying a few years ago. Food was often bad and in scanty supply. Planters were required to provide a stipulated ration of dry provisions, but this varied considerably. It generally consisted of a few pounds of cornmeal or flour with a bit of salted meat or fish. This was halved for women and children. The whole was doled out on Saturdays and expected to last an entire week. It was poor stuff for those days of superhuman labor, but could be supplemented by gardening on estates, which cared to spare a bit of wasteland for kitchen gardens. This produce was the property of the enslaved worker, who could sell it and earn enough to buy manumission. I didn't know what manumission was. It's to buy your freedom from slavery. Major Capados recounted of Tobago in 1833. Long before emancipation, the Negroes had the exclusive right of the sale of ground provisions, namely yams, tanias, and sweet potatoes, cassava. And they had that monopoly because no other people would cultivate them in Tobago. And consequently, they affixed what price they pleased. The legislature, in vain, tried to control them in that respect. Even whilst slaves, they answered the decree of the House of Assembly, affixing a tariff by withholding the supplies, and the markets were destitute of the necessary commodities till the decree was rescinded. A liberal slave owner, liberal in the barest sense of the word, a liberal slave owner might regale his enslaved workers for Christmas with a few extra barrels of flour, some fresh meat from a butchered pig, and a few gallons of rum. Clothing allowances were similarly meager. Twice a year, the men were to receive a cloth jacket, a shirt, and had a pair of trousers, and the women a coarse skirt, woolen wrapper, petticoats, and a handkerchief. Children had no allocation and were clothed in the cast-offs of their parents. Those who tended gardens and sold produce could buy lengths of bright cotton print and headkerchiefs. This evolved into a signature Martinican style. But plantation slavery did not function simply because of threats of violence. The enslaved workers were also cajoled and persuaded to work. They were given small incentives, extra food, clothing, and free time from work in the hope that they would work effectively. They were also given land on which to cultivate foodstuffs or rare animals for their own use. The Amelioration Act of 1823, passed by the British Parliament, was supposed, in theory, to provide a legal framework for the treatment of enslaved workers. and included such clemencies as banning of corporal punishment for females. Hooray! Recognizing the rights of slaves to personal property, and most importantly, the district magistrate could issue licenses for the marriage of slaves. Formerly, an owner had the right to deny the enslaved worker his freedom. The provisions of the Act saw the introduction of a salaried officer called the protector of the slaves. This man was supposed to ensure that the slave owners adhered to the law, but in most cases, he was a corrupt person and thus saw fit to ignore his duties. The office of the protector in Trinidad was on Edward Street in Port of Spain. The Amelioration Act made this illegal and moreover removed an oppressive tax which had formerly existed and had to be paid by the enslaved worker who wished to purchase manumission. This legislation was often ignored, but paved the way for the eventual end of a system of bondage, which is a blot on human history. So that was a very interesting treatise that this Angelo Bisesasing wrote.
Thank you for reading, Frank. I don't know if you have another piece that you wanted to read today or not.
No, that was it.
Okay, just wanted to check. Any comments on Frank's piece? I thought it was
Yeah, I
really
was hoping.
interesting, Frank.
Sorry.
Oh no,
I
go
was-
ahead, Krishna. I can go after.
Long journey to emancipation day. I was waiting for that. We reached 1823, the Amelioration Act.
Yes.
It didn't go on to 1833, 1834, 1838. Frank,
Uh-huh.
you're sure you're not shortchanging us there?
No, that's what is written here. The Amelioration Act of
1823.
1833.
33.
Yes.
Oh, it's 33. I thought you said 20. All right. The Amelioration Act of 1833, I suppose that was the forerunner to the Emancipation Act of
Right.
1833.
Yeah.
1833, which came into effect in 1834, which saw the introduction of the apprenticeship system, and was only on it until, which was supposed to go from 4 to 6 years. It was supposed to end 1840, but because of pressures, because of examinations, it ended in 1838 in the British West Indies. We need to clarify that, to keep that in mind. The British West Indies ended slavery in 1838. Okay.
A very interesting aside is where I live. Where I live in Canada, it's in Windsor, Ontario. It's the southernmost tip of Canada, and you have to cross part of the Great Lakes to get into the United States. And it's at the end of what is called the Underground Railroad. And as you know, the Underground Railroad was a route by which slaves who ran away were hidden by liberal white people in their farms and so on, and they traveled at night, and they headed up to Canada and crossed the Detroit River into where I live. And in fact, where I live, there are still communities made up mostly of descendants of former slaves. And something that's very interesting, I used to work, when I was working, I used to work in a clinic just down the road from here. And a descendant of one of these escaped slaves came to see me. And I'm not going to use her real name, but I'll use a made-up name to prove the point. Let's say her name was Step, S-T-E-P. So I went in, when I looked at the chart, her name was Step apostrophe S, Mrs. Steps. And I realized, wait a minute, this is history right here. because in the United States, I'm not sure in the Caribbean, but in the United States, the slaves took on the names, as you know, took on the names of the slave master, but with an apostrophe S to indicate possession. So she was the property of
That is
one
correct.
Mr.
That is
Step.
correct.
So was that, did they do that in Trinidad as well?
I suppose they have the, I don't know how many use the apostrophe, but yes,
Oh, so
they were
this lady,
named after the owners.
yeah, this lady retained the apostrophe. Some people drop the apostrophe S because of the stigma, but it looks like her family retained the apostrophe to the word step. And I thought that was very interesting. And in fact, I said to her, I said, do you know how your name got this apostrophe S? And she didn't know. So I explained it to her. She was quite surprised.
Very good, very good.
I could say something here about that. I think what they replaced it with somehow along the way is the word son, S-O-N.
Like
So
like Robert.
Yeah, that is correct.
Oh,
Cassie, Donaldson,
and Robertson.
Johnson, Robertson. Yeah, Davidson. That's correct.
Oh.
Also, Frank, I noted your reference to the auction block, which is something that I think in your reading there you mentioned that it was more prevalent, more practiced
In Tobago
than in Trinidad. Yeah, but you know, a lot of people kind of shy away from that because you know that apart from and not apart from that, that was a kind of more serious, shameful kind of thing, you know, people feeling up your bodies and then determining by touch, you know, what you were, where you should go, whether you were fit for the field or the house or in between and that kind of stuff. But the reference is good, you know. Yeah.
I like to the reference to the barrack in Chatham, Frank.
Yes.
Borg Congo is Borg, B-O-U-R-G.
B-O-U-R-G. Yeah.
Borg Congo in Chatham, as the last known barrack in Trinidad.
Yes.
Yeah, Angelo does a lot of this. Yeah.
Where is Chatham?
Meticulous. Chatham is deep south, on the way to Cedros, past Point 14, past Point 14 on the way to Cedros.
Yeah. I think sometime in maybe 70 or 71, going down to that area, somebody pointed out some of the barracks that some was still in the original form, and then others have been remodeled and all that. That might have been about 70 or 71. I was going down to Granville.
You know, I was just thinking when you were talking about the names, one of the characters in one of my novels, the novel Troubadour, is a man in Seattle, a young black man and a gay man who is having quite a laugh at the fact that his name is Scottish. And he knows that it's coming from when his ancestors were slaves in the US. And so he's getting quite a kick out of the fact that he's a gay black Scotsman, descendant of former slaves.
And then on the other hand, too, some of these slave owners were the actual fathers of some of these slave descendants.
Yeah.
Frank, I thought your
one other thing
story.
too, I want to say that Angelo Bissessa Singh has two excellent books of history. I met Angelo a few years ago when Bocas Lit was The only time Bocas was in South, and we became friends. And then Angelo's father, many times poetry and prose, we have programs in the library, especially when we have book launches and things like that. And he always come and MC. We became friends too. You know, I have a little story about Angelo. I had a classic Mercedes Benz, a 1968 model, and when Angelo saw it, he told me that that was the car he used to go to school. It belonged to a magistrate in Siparia at that time when he was going to school. And he always wanted to come down by me and take the car for a run. Unfortunately, he died before that could have been done. Also, I want to say too that Angelo's aunt, Patricia Bissessa, and the virtual museum that Angelo used to have on the internet is now an actual museum with a building around the savannah that I have to go one of these days that anybody could attend. And Angelo's aunt, his mother, his father have always been a great supporter of poetry and prose. So just I thought I should put that in.
Thanks, Motilal. I wanted to comment on Frank's reading just for a bit. Frank, I love the fact that it went into everyday lives, because we talk about such a huge period of time, but that's a day-to-day, day in, day out experience. And it was an experience where I can't even begin to comprehend, because they didn't know emancipation was coming. And there was no sense of security in terms of even keeping your family with you. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, I just have to work for this amount of time and I'll be free. With that, when he just said that they could buy back their freedom, that was almost a joke, because they're placed in a situation where that was impossible. So, and then your story about the young lady with the name,
With the
imagine,
apostrophe.
yeah, imagine that you're still so close to that part of history that you can touch it. And you can
Yes.
speak to that person.
Well, actually, I'm even closer than that. There was a surgeon. He's called the father of gynecology. He was in the South, and he owned slaves. I forgot his first name. His last name was Sim, S-I-M. And he did a lot of research on surgical procedures, female, it's gynecology. And he used as guinea pigs about 8 to 10 female black slaves, which he kept in essentially cages like animals. And there was a misconception that African people did not feel pain. If they did, it was just minor pain. And so he would experiment on them surgically without anesthetics. And he developed a speculum that we use for female examinations called the Sims speculum. I never knew this until I wrote one of my books there, and I was doing some research in that. And Sims speculum was developed by this Dr. Sim, using these African women from cages and operating on them without anesthesia. And he developed this speculum, and it's still used today.
Yep. He wasn't the only one. That was common, unfortunately. And there's still a stigma to that today in terms of pain. I saw a documentary about the opioid epidemic, and part of the reason why it didn't affect the Black community as much is because when they were initially prescribing the pain medicine, they tend to prescribe pain medicines more to other raced individuals than the Black race individuals. And that's one of the reasons why it didn't affect the Black community as much. When I saw that in that documentary, I just shook my head, because I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of people, when they go to the doctor, say, I'm not being heard, I'm not being listened to, they don't really believe you have pain. And it's there in black and white in terms of that sort of evidence. But it wasn't that what you spoke about isn't a one-off thing. So especially when COVID came around, I saw a lot of clips and memes and a lot of things talking about that, about using Black people as kind of guinea pigs. I believe it was done in the Caribbean as well.
Yeah.
Any other comments? All right. Thanks for reading, Frank. We will move ahead to Mutilal. Mutilal is going to read for us The Métayers of Tobago. And this is another Angelo Bessessa sing piece. And he was also going to perform a calypso by George Rampasad. So, Mutilal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gusha. This again, this is a piece by Angelo Bessessa Singh, and Krishna helped me with the pronunciation. The métier. Okay, the métiers of Tobago by Angelo Bessessa Singh. Emancipation in 1834 did not hit Tobago nearly as hard as Trinidad, since Tobago had no free crown lands for ex-slaves to squat upon, and thus those who did not emigrate were compelled to continue working on the plant for the planters. In order to keep the sugar estates going, the métier system, which was a form of sharecropping, developed. Under the system, the métier, the sharecropper, occupied a piece of land in which he or she planted cane. At harvest time, the estate owner supplied carts which drew cut canes to the mill, where they were processed into rum and sugar, of which the métier received a percentage. In addition, the métier was often allowed permission to build a cottage on the estate and provision grounds. Over a decade later, 1847, fallen sugar prices and the failure of the estates in the West Indies for want of labor saw the bankruptcy of the West India Bank, which provided credit to many of Tobago planters. The lack of financing for machinery, upgrades, and laborer wages meant that the planters were more dependent on the métier than ever. Even so, the production of sugar plummeted. By 1862, the following could be written. The métier system was first introduced in this island in 1843 by Mr. Cruikshank, the then proprietor of the Prospect Estate, and it was generally resorted to in 1845. Such was the depression at the time that had not the laborer been induced to work for a share of the produce, the estate, for want of means to pay in money for labor, must have gone out of cultivation. Under such a system of cultivation, there can be no farming. The laborer cultivates his field so long as it remains in his heart. It is not in his interest to manure it, for as soon as it ceases to produce what will remunerate him for his labor, he moves on to a fresh field. There is an entire absence of implemental husbandry, and owing to a great measure to the bad faith in which on both sides the contract is too often carried out, what is done is imperfectly done. Mind, from many casual yields and little return. I have known cane so planted to remain on the land 2 years without being cropped. The collapse of the West India Bank meant that the estates had to be sold in Tobago at low prices. It saw the emergence of a black planter class, wherein men who were formerly slaves and who had amassed considerable savings became estate owners. Some estates were forced to sell small plots to peasant cultivators, which saw the establishment of an agrarian peasant class which survives with a strong and independent spirit in the current generations of Tobagonians. Okay, that was a piece by Angelo Pizzasalving.
Any comments?
Okay, now I would like to share this calypso by George Rampasad. So here goes. Not very long ago when Britannia ruled the waves, she controlled and dominated the trade in African slaves. On ships in the Middle Passage, many died or barely survived. In Trinidad and Tobago, 40,000 arrived. They took Igbo Madinga and Yoruba from Africa, and the French colonies they took under the cedula. For the people taken from Africa, life would never be the same. A life of torment and misery, and slave owners proper to the game. There was no room to hide and no place to run. Suffering and toiling under men with whip and gun. Forbidden to speak their language and practice their religion. But in secret they held on to their customs and traditions. By power, discipline, grace, and beauty, and the blessing of God Ocean, they managed to survive under the blazing sun. Bam baram baram baram, bam baram baram, bam baram baram baram, bam badam badam. They rose up in armed rebellion, led by many a hero, like Daga from St. Joseph and Sandy in Tobago, breaking the shackles of slavery to become the cornerstone of society, breaking the shackles of slavery to become the cornerstone of society. For justice and for equal rights, they fought morning, noon, and night, learning the lesson of history that freedom doesn't come for free. The struggle of our ancestors, we must learn and understand, is a gift we can now enjoy, freedom in this land. So Trinidad and Tobago, have a happy holiday. Congratulations on African Emancipation Day. Be conscious and aware as you go on your way. Remember the spirits of the ancestors on this special day. Our thanks and our respect as we celebrate this occasion. May Oshun, Allah, God, and Shiva bless our nation. So let us pull together and we can find a way for a better TNT on African Emancipation Day. So let us pull together and we can find a way for a better TNT on African Emancipation Day. Thank you. That was a calypso by George Rampasad.
Thank you so much, Mr. I always love it when you sing. Any comments?
Very nice. Very nice, Modi.
You know, this guy, George Rampasad, he always write on, was a very patriotic person. He writes on and every holiday, every celebration we have in Trinidad. He writes a calypso, he write on pan, he write on mass, he write on calypso and all of that. So I know if you just go on the internet, you will see a lot of composition by George Ampasad. Thanks
He
again for
lives,
listening.
he lives in Denmark or Finland or somewhere there.
Yeah, Holland. I think it's somewhere Holland.
I'm not too sure, but
No,
I know he's
Frank-
on the internet and he's on
Frank-
Facebook
It's Denmark.
regularly.
Denmark, I think.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the same Philip is that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, you Google it and you will see him playing the steel pan and singing and thing. He has one on the Ciudad Sadu and the building of the temple in the sea. A nice one. Yeah.
I noticed in that song he mentions introducing religion to their slaves. And I remember a quote by Desmond Tutu from South Africa. He said, when the Europeans came, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, let us pray. And when we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible. So I think religion was a technique, a technique to subjugate people as well initially.
Any other comments, Cassie?
No, no, Gersha. I'm just happy that all of this is happening. I look forward to the video, which I want to share. Yeah, I look forward to sharing this video, man. Good stuff.
Yeah, it's a lovely session. We'll move on to Krishna. He's reading Testimony of 1st of August Negroes, the last to be set free by Lorna Goodson.
Yeah, Lorna Goodson, Poet Laureate of Jamaica, born in 1947. This was penned, I understand, from what I'm seeing here, in 2017 as part of the Emancipation celebrations. It appeared in the Sunday Gleaner. So, Testimony of the 1st of August Negroes, the last to be set free. I'm not using any Jamaican accent here, no? I can't make the Jamaican accent, sorry. I tell my friend Sheba, stop up your ears with this beeswax, so that the bantering song of all who get leave scotch-free don't mad we who still bind to cane peas. We who get left back because spiteful massa say emancipation is like an aged white rum, so strong, not every Negro can imbibe at one time, lest they grow drunken and stagger. So him water down freedom, share it out little, and what left in a barrel bottom is for me and you. I say, don't balk you. We wait long already. We can wait more still. She say, since them carry me come from Guinea, we want go home. Me too. But if it's one thing me learn from what St. Paul preach is, they that wait, no, it's not him say that. Must be the prophet Isaiah or one other man who helped write Massa Bible with the lock and key. My friend say, she don't want to hear no comfortable words today. My heartstrings stretch out too. Me disappoint, me tired pray. Bend down. Full free hurry come up, them a come down the road like a Syrian wolf upon the fold. I'm not rightly sure what that mean, but me like how it sound. Turn your back and bend down, lower, inspect grass hard like a cruel overseer. Bend down, chop furious and cuss like wicked slave driver. Tell grass how we good for nothing, lazy and no make for flourish. Say, bad like sin that harm commit. Them gone. We can stand up now. Our day of jubilee are come. So it's in 3 parts. That is one voice. I'll talk about it after. So this is the second part, address to the weed in the cane piece. Pretty little grass weed, to me you are sweet rose, even though some don't think so. According to them, it matters not that you bud and blossom. You do not count as flowers. Therefore, you're not good enough to cut and put in a water vase and set on people table in a big house. So them order me, a human weed, to dig you down and you up and fling you to one side, although your roots bind the ground together. You're as good as any other growing thing. You're just planted where you're less counted. To me, little weed, you are sweet as any roses. That's the second part, called the second voice. And the third part, the conclusion, is entitled Last Words. Yes, it's true. Some who get freedom first walk past and mock the 1st of August nigger, the last to get emancipation. Yes, sir. We had was to bear all the commotion and bangarang of old pan as them galang pass we out of the estate. Some believe all the foolishness hard people say about freedom, not for any and every one. How some need to be led with bridle and bit like mule and horse. Not because some get let go first. Always remember this. It matters not when you did leave. Every single one of we come out of the cane piece. That's the piece. That's it. So let me just talk a little about this before Gersha opens the comments. So this is an artistic piece, a poetic piece. It contrasts with the expository pieces we got earlier on, the expository pieces from Heather and Frank, and the prose pieces from Natasha and Leslie, and also the expository piece from Motilal. So this is the poetic piece. We get the use of biblical allusions, quite a few references to the Bible. And Frank just mentioned about the use of religion as a means of, well, the whole aim was to Christianize and civilize. The white man's burden, right, was to Christianize and civilize people less than them. So religion was used as a way of civilizing, keeping the slaves passive. They stress long suffering, perseverance. What they stress? Obedience, things like that. So the last testimony of the title is Testimony of 1st of August Negroes, the last to be set free. There is consolation there in the biblical allusion to Matthew. The last shall be the first, and the first shall be the last. For many be called, but few chosen. Then there is a reference to Paul, St. Paul, when she's trying to recall now, who said that they wait. But then she says it's not St. Paul. Well, we know St. Paul, Saul became Paul on the road to Damascus. He converted, became the 13th apostle. But it's true to say, the quote is really from Isaiah. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. And this is what, while the white man would think that he has the Africans obedient and working and so on, they also saw something from it that they took and built in themselves. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. It gave them hope that one day they're going to regain their strength. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. And there's a literary allusion when she talks about the Syrian wolf upon the fold. That's an allusion to a poem by Lord Byron, The Destruction of Sennacherib. I checked the pronunciation there. The good thing about Google nowadays, anytime you're having problems, you just Google things and you'll get some help. The destruction of Sennacherib, the siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC. There's a nice, the poem uses the anapestic rhythm, where she talks about the Syrian wolf upon the fold. You could check it. I didn't pull any lines from the poem, but very anapestic rhythm. Ta-da-dum, 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 ta-da-dum. It's one of an unusual use of the anapestic rhythm in that poem. And it's a reference to also to Kings. That is to be found in Kings and Isaiah, 2 Kings 18 to 19 and Isaiah 36 to 37. And of course, the most controversial reference in this poem is the reference to Ham. Ham is one of the sons of Noah. And in the Bible, we are told that Ham saw Noah. And you know, saw, when you say Adam saw Eve, what it means, right? The verb saw. So the scholars, I suppose, have different interpretations of what happened with Ham. But what a lot of people know is that one of Ham's sons, Canaan, was cursed. He was condemned to perpetual slavery, to serve others. And people have used that to talk about African slavery now. They say, well, yes, and they're cursed from the Bible. You check it, you will see. People use that argument. So Cassie could come in and talk about this. So that first piece, I enjoyed the first piece more than the second and the third. The second piece is about the weed, addressed to the weed and the cane piece, where the weed is identified, the person is identifying himself or herself as a weed. That is, you're as good, sorry, what is it? Yeah, you're not good enough. You're not good enough to cut and put in a water vase and set upon table in a big house. And they talked about that in the first piece. We're good for nothing. Tell grass how it good for nothing, lazy, and no make for flourish. And people use that kind of argument about Africans. And the third part, this year, you see, in 1834, they came and they proclaimed it. You all are free. So all the Africans now say, what? We're free. Great, great news. But then they come and say, well, you're free, but you're not free. So they confuse them. You're free. What? Are free, but are not free? No, we had to hold you back in the plantations for another 6 years. So what? So 1814, now we go free you. And you could imagine the paranoia that went on, that people experience when they hear that they're free, but they're not free. And that is where Lorna talked about this feeling of those who were set free as in, I understand Antigua and Bermuda, they were immediately freed, whereas in the other countries, they had to undergo a period of what they call apprenticeship. Here they do this now, you know, how they use terms. This is a period of apprenticeship. We're going to teach you how to be free. We can't give you freedom just like that. Hold on. You see, how some need to be led with bridle and bit, like mule and horse. But freedom not for any and every one. And she talked about the barrel, right? What she talked about the barrel? Yes. And so him water down freedom, share it out little, and what left in a barrel bottom is for me and you. So the pieces are linked with some of these concepts, and I think it portrays in this literary, poetic way some of the experiences of the slaves at the time. I think I will pause there, and the technique is free verse. She's using free verse. It's conversational. It's voices speaking, and yes, that is Lorna. Okay, I will pause there for.
Thank you so much for reading, Krishna. I appreciate it. I believe no one else could do it the way you can do it. The second voice is the one that I appreciated the most. I liked the imagery that she created and the weed. And you spoke as well about the language. When I heard the piece, the language in terms of it's bled into today, where you will still even hear someone on the radio, if they're giving commentary, say, you know, Trinidadians always need a big stick. And it's a lot of little phrases like that we don't stop to think where it came from, but it's still very much relevant in the local dialogue. All right. I'm going to open the floor for anyone else that has commentary or questions, or whether you like the poem or not.
Yeah, Cassie, come in, Cassie.
Yeah, because I'm just with a Kabin boy, but I'm not going to answer you what you said. You know, what you said is perfect. I have a question. What is the name of the poetess, and what is the name of the poem?
Oh,
I don't think I got that.
I said who it was at the start. Lorna Goodison, the poet laureate of Jamaica, born in 1947. The title is Testimony of 1st of August Negroes, the last to be set free. And it's in 3 parts. That's the first title. The second piece is titled Address to the Weed in the Cane piece. And that's another voice. And then the third piece is called Last Words. Yeah,
I'm still at the point of writing down testimony of the what Negroes? First, last?
Testimony of the 1st of August Negroes. That's when they proclaimed the Lorna. And it's the last to be set free. All that is the title, eh? Testimony of 1st of August Negroes, the last to be set free. And she wrote this in 2017 for the 2017 Emancipation celebrations in Jamaica.
She's very, very talented.
Significantly, she's
internationally renowned. She's
now living in Canada, I understand.
Yes, she's an internationally renowned poet, though.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I know the name. I know it. And here we have another son here. Goody son.
Goody son, yeah. Don't tell her that, you know, Cassie.
Any comments on the piece? Krishna, I believe it was just so well explained. And if you really take that piece by how you took it little by little, you can teach an entire class on it. Even the reasons for the
Yeah,
change
but I
in
did
the
teacher,
voices.
I did teacher in me now. I can't help it. I try.
No, I know you did it such justice. Thank you so much for reading. Even the change in the voices I felt was very powerful.
Yeah, I like the second. Well, you talked about the second one. I don't like that piece, but I recognize the change in voice, you know, as
Yeah.
opposed to the first one. How I saw it, as the first one was like the voice of the slave. The second is the voice of a servant. And the third is the voice of like a preacher. A preacher. That is what I thought.
The
Would we
second
call
resonated with me because I feel like the second was a little more my style of if I were to write something, how I would go about it. Go ahead, Cassie.
yeah, wouldn't we call that personification or something like that?
The second piece, I didn't know. No, she's using the metaphor of the grass weed, and then she comes to identify with the weed, identify herself with the weed.
Yeah,
but I
but
saw
the
it as
weed itself,
I saw it like a servant. Yeah.
The weed itself is not active, not saying anything, right? That's right.
No.
No.
So
Yeah.
that's not.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then.
Right.
Good.
Anyone
Well,
else
Krishna?
wants to jump in and make a comment?
Well, Krishna, while you were reading that, all I could think of is, oh my God, Krishna, you are a teacher with a capital T. Really extremely
Take people out of the bush,
informative.
but you can't take the bush out of them, you know. So you take me out of teaching, but you can't take teaching out of me.
That's wonderful.
Krishna, you ever thought of giving classes on Zoom?
Gush, I'm retired. I'm tired. Retired, tired, and I'm focusing on my writing now.
All right. If there are no other comments, Krishna, once again, thank you so much for reading, and I loved the detail you went into it with it. You
No
really
problem.
gave that poem justice.
You're welcome.
And we will go ahead along to Vishnu Gosine. He'll be reading an excerpt from the Strange Ship and the Strange Creatures, taken from Rancharan's West Indian narrative. 1 minute.
Okay.
Just have to find Vishnu. Okay.
I need some help.
I'm hearing you. I can't see you. Oh, there you are. Are
Okay,
you?
great.
Do you want to say something? You sound a little off, Vishnu.
But she said, do a test, do a song test.
All okay there?
Is that
Kinda.
Is that okay? Fine.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better.
Okay, great. Okay, so the piece is taken from Ramchand's West Indian narrative, collection of pieces that Ramchand put together so many years ago. And the piece I'm going to read is called The Slave Ship and Strange Creatures. And that itself comes from Equiano's travels. The first object which saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast was the sea and a slave ship, which was then riding at anchor and waiting for its cargo. These filled me with astonishment, which was soon converted into terror, which I am yet at a loss to describe. I was immediately handled and tossed up to see if I was sound by some of the crew. And I was now persuaded that I had got into a world of bad spirits and that they were going to kill me. Their complexions too, differing so much from ours, their long hair and the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm me in this belief. When I looked around the ship too and saw a large furnace of copper boiling and a multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenance in dejection and sorrow, I no longer doubted of my fate. Quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the deck and fainted. When I recovered a little, I found some black people about me who I believe were some of those who brought me up and had been receiving their pay. I asked them if we were eaten by those white men with horrible looks, red faces and long hair. They told me I was not. I could not help expressing my fears and apprehensions as to some of my countrymen. I asked them if these people had no country, but lived in this hollow place, the ship. They told me they did not, but came distant one. Then, said I, how come that in all our country never heard of them? And they told me it was because they lived so far off. I asked where their women were and if they had any like themselves. I was told they had. And why, said I, do we not see them? They answered that it was because they had left them behind. I asked how the vessel could go. They told me they could not tell. There was cloth put upon the mast by the help of ropes, and then the vessel went on. And the white men had some spell of magic they put in the water when they liked to stop in order to stop the vessel. I was exceedingly amazed at this account, and he thought they were spirits. I therefore wished to be far amongst them, for I expected they would sacrifice me. So that's the first part of the extract. The other short piece is called Preferring Death to Slavery. One day when we had a smooth sea and moderate wind, two of my wearied countrymen who were chained together, I was near them at the time, preferring death to such a life of misery, somehow made through the nettings and jumped into the sea. Immediately, another quite dejected fellow, who on account of his illness was suffered to be put out of irons, also followed their example, and I believed many more would have soon have done the same if they had not been prevented by the ship's crew, who were instantly alarmed. Those of us that were the most active were in a moment put down under the deck. There was such a noise and confusion among the people of the ship as I never heard before. Stop her, or get the boat to go after the slaves. However, two of the wretches were drowned, but they got the other, and afterwards flogged him unmercifully, but thus attempting to prefer death to sleep. Thank you. So those are the two pieces I chose, some Ramchand's West Indian narrative. One recounting days on the ship and little strange questions, because understand that the fellow didn't know where he was going, anything about himself. And the other one, when the terror came in, they suspected, oh boy, they might really kill us or something like that. Let us kill ourselves instead. And they jumped to the ship, ended their lives. Okay, those are my two pieces. Thank you for listening.
Any comments? Thanks, Vishnu.
I was just thinking that a lot of these stories are basically, they're definitely horribly true. And they're horror stories. They are really, really horrible horror stories about people. It's really truly horrifying to know that this really happened.
It is. It's certainly a heavy program today, but it's
I think necessary, Gersha.
Yeah.
Very necessary.
And when you think of Emancipation Day, we have to remember, especially in the Caribbean, it wasn't just, you know, there today and gone the next, you know. It was a process, a slow, painful process. And I believe it's a trauma that still lingers with us. I'm going to
Heather called it what, the fetters of the mind. Is that what you said, Heather?
Yes, I was just, yeah, that's exactly what the
Fetters.
point of
Yeah.
the poem, the last two stanzas deals with how that mark on the psyche hasn't left and probably will never, because the people are changed. They're not like the Africans that remained in Africa. They had to develop a new culture and a new way of living, but they were irrevocably changed.
Well, we're a nation of slaves and indentured laborers, so
And we're doing good in the Olympics.
Yes. What sense, Heather? Thank you for lightening that. I'm going to go ahead and read the last piece before closing the meeting, Emancipation Day by Olive Signor. How can we measure the gladness of August morning as the dawning of the first day of freedom, when we were never enslaved? How can we measure the loosening of shackles, the lowering of bars, if we cannot show the scars? How can we calibrate the distance we need to travel from the history that holds us hostage even now? Remember, the past is only half the circle. Our task is not to grieve or count the wounds, but to free ourselves from mental slavery. Only then will 1st of August satisfy the thirst in us to honor those who have gone before, to hail the future at the door. Then we can truly celebrate our Freedom Day in any way we undertake to close the circle, to wheel and come again. So with that, I would like to open the floor up for any comments, any last comments.
You know, I was just thinking, Gersha, that's a remarkable poem. And it occurred to me, listening just a few months ago to an interview with one of the remarkable actors of the United States, a Black actor by the name of Brock Peters. He was very famous. He was in To Kill a Mockingbird. He was in Porgy and Bess. He did a lot of work on stage. And during the interview, he mentioned that people forget, even though he was being well paid as an actor, that he was famous, that he went through a huge amount of racial prejudice and injustice and hatred and even violence as he was growing up. And it made him the great actor that he is. But as he said, you know, in spite of that, I could have really done without all of that other horrible stuff that I had to go through. Very touching moment by Brock Peters. And I think that's neat to remember that, you know, whether you're famous or not, many will go through that kind of horror as you're growing up. And not just here, but in the United States, which is still going on today, I'm sad to say.
Yes, it is. And in terms of slavery as well, that's human trafficking. There's still slaves being sold and bought every day. So we celebrate Emancipation Day, but it is still something that happens. And we should also recognize that. Any other comments? Mutilal, any last words before we close meeting?
Before you close, not Motilal,
Well,
yeah, Krish.
Yeah, okay. I just want to remind
Yes.
everybody.
Mot,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Krish.
yeah. I want to just Vish, would you like to say anything about your work?
Me? No.
Yes. No? All right. Okay, Moti, floor is.
Well, I was just wondering if Gertrude's poem is lining up with what she said before it and after it, and what Harold alluded to, which is that it's a trauma that still lingers with us. Does your poem recognize that, or is your poem saying that forget about it and let's close the circle?
No, I believe the poem, it's in two pieces. I couldn't find it in its entire, I couldn't find the entire thing online, but it's not my poem. I didn't pen it. It's Oliver Signor. And
Okay.
I believe the first part of the
Oliver.
poem is speaking to this generation, the generation that really we didn't endure slavery. So it's asking, how can we measure the gladness when we were never enslaved? How can we measure the loosening of shackles when we cannot show the scars? How can we calibrate the distance we need to travel from the history that holds us hostage even now? So yes, I think it even though it's speaking of a place that didn't experience the direct trauma, it's something that's being carried, just like any trauma. They did there was this famine, I can't remember where, but I was on YouTube and I was looking at this video on when children that were in utero during the famine, they showed, I don't know if Frank would be aware of it because it's kind of medically associated. They showed signs of someone that experienced a famine. So, and they were not even born yet. So it's something that they've seen, they've done studies on, where when a region experienced famine, how for generations after, the body's predisposed to kind of holding on to calories and things like that. So yeah, I think in terms of that type of trauma, that was for that length of time, that yeah, it still lingers to this day. And then this poem goes on to remember the past is only half the circle. So he's alluding now to like the future, right? So like, remember, the past is only half the circle. So you're not, at least this is what I took from it, and everyone can jump in with their own opinions, but to me, I took from it, the past is only half the circle, which means my identity is not wholly that of a slave or wholly that of trauma. The African wasn't invented in slavery. They existed before. And that's why I really appreciated Heather's poem. So at least that's what I took from it. Our task is not to grieve or count the wounds, but to free ourselves from mental slavery. And so it went on. Only then will 1st of August satisfy. I love that line, because even this meeting, I feel, has a little bit of a heavy, because the topic is one that's so brutal and so hard to talk about and to digest. So he's saying only after you come to that point of freeing yourself from mental slavery and the healing will the 1st of August truly satisfy the thirst in us to honor those who have come before. Because when I think about it, someone along my bloodline would have endured the trauma that we're speaking of. So even on my other half, that's why I feel free to say we're a nation of indentured laborers and slaves, because even on my other half, there's that trauma of indentured laborers. And when Mutila and I went to the Mud Museum, we were able to get that bit of history as well. It goes on to talk about the future. Who have gone before to hail the future at the door? Then we can truly celebrate our Freedom Day in any way we undertake to close the circle, to wheel and come again. So I'll open the floor for Krishna. I don't know if he's familiar with the poem, or Vishnu, or anyone else to give their commentary and give a little insight on Oliver Senior's poem.
No, I'm not familiar with that poem. I just want to get back to one point I neglected to state about Lorna Goodison's poem. Her use of allusions, the biblical, the literary, the historical, is one way a poet, a poet, let's say, can make the poem, pack more into it, the multi-layered a piece, as opposed to she didn't have to make use of these allusions. A lot of writers write a poem and they present it to you and they say, right, a wonderful piece I've written here. Have a look at it. But a careful poet, that's the point I'm making, a careful writer, a careful poet, someone conscious of writing a poem, would put into the poem things like these. The very title, the last to be set free. When I say the first, the last becoming the first and the first becoming the last, that adds to the poem. So that's the point I wanted to make, that when you're writing a poem, you could introduce, you don't have to have 99 allusions, just one, just two, just three. Okay, two.
And build on them.
And it packs more into the poem. Yeah. So that if people could recognize the allusion, then they go to what you're alluding to and see how you're saying so much more than what you're presenting in the lines. That's the power of the allusion. And I'm not talking about metaphor and simile and so on. An allusion is a very powerful device that writers, poets can make use of. End of the lesson.
Can I interject?
Go ahead.
This is a book by Dion Brand. It is called A Map to the Door of No Return. I just wanted to read something about how the stain remains on the psyche. She had gone to one of the lesser islands, and I can't remember which one, and she had gone to a museum and she saw lists in books of slaves. They were unnamed, but this is what she read of these lists. I cannot help wondering, at the personal side of reading these lists, what did May, girl 10, sickly look like? Or Alfred, man 20, good health? There were no ruins of slave houses on this island. Their lodgings were so poorly made, so transient, nothing is left of that. Perhaps all of that is to the good. Forgetting is a crucial condition of living with any peace. But the records of what and how are in the living, in our habits, in our tastes, in our styles. A sweet tooth, a love of starchy foods, a sudden hatred of fields, a desire for big cities, an insistent need for the loud colors, beautiful shoes, excesses of all kinds, whether we can afford them or not. These are the traits that remain with us from the trauma that was suffered by our forebears. They come down in the cellular memory, and they show up in these little things that we don't know what to attribute them to. But that was a very powerful message that I got out of that book. This girl that grew up on a beach in Guayguari.
Thanks for sharing, Pat. When I went to the Mud Museum, there's a list. I think I posted it on our page of the names, and I read the list, but I was looking for my name, and I was almost holding my breath. Our name wasn't there, but it just, it was a small moment where it's just like I was holding my breath to like read the list, But so thanks for sharing. Any comments?
Well, Gersha, I was just thinking, my father was born in Barbados. I never knew him. He died when I was 3. But when I was 19, I visited Barbados. I'd been there before, but as a much younger man. And when I was 19, I decided that I wanted to see if I could find some of my relatives there. I found 2. They both owned cane plantations and had 2 huge mastiff dogs guarding the place. And I had dinner there with 2 of them. And I have to tell you that, you can choose your friends, but you can't your relatives, right? I was appalled at the bigotry that they displayed to me about the other Bajans, the African Bajans there. It just almost made me sick. And it's a really interesting thing to know. And this was in the 1950s now. This is not so long ago that I would, discover that I had relatives that were so bigoted and prejudiced and hateful. Of course, I haven't seen them or had anything to do with them, and they're probably long gone. But it was quite an enlightening moment for me to realize, that thank God I was not like these people. But it stayed with me. It stayed with me to know that, yes, this is part of my past.
Yeah. I was in a writing workshop with someone, and she read a poem, and it was about a 300-year-old tree. And I had that thought popped into my head, and it popped into my head like that. Okay. It means your family was here when they owned slaves.
Yeah.
The other thing, looking for names changed when Africans and Indian people came to the New World, because the person who the scribe was, say, a European, an Englishman or a Frenchman or Dutch or whoever. And one interesting example is I had a friend from Trinidad when I lived in Calgary, and his last name was Trabole. And the way he got that name, when his father landed, they said, "What's your name?" And the Englishman was writing down the names. He said, Trabole. But what it was Turab Ali. Turab Ali. And if you pronounce it very fast, Turab Ali. He wrote Trabole. So do you know anybody named Trabole in Trinidad? Trabole?
Yes, we have the
Yes,
Trabolays. Yeah.
Well, that's how he got that. So when you look at Mahabir and so on, you may not find that it might be a different spelling or a different name.
But
Perhaps there was a Dr. Jean Trabole who used to practice in Pinal for many years. We became good friends meeting at the Texaco Club.
I thought
Yeah, it must be related. Must be related to the guy. His name was.
They used to be from San Fernando.
His name was Merlin Trabole, guy.
Yeah.
He was Gene, and he used to practice. He was a doctor. He's practicing Pinal Junction, and we used to spend a lot of time at the then Texaco Trinidad Club in Clark Road.
But this is not just a Trinidad thing. This happened at Ellis Island in the United States when all of those hundreds of thousands of immigrants were stopped and put through immigration there. And because their names were too complicated for the people that were in charge of Ellis Island, they simplified the names, especially Jewish names, which somehow or other they either couldn't spell or couldn't pronounce, and they anglicized those names and are still that way to this day. Very, very sad situation.
In fact, there's a little joke a Chinese friend told me the other day. He said there's a Chinese fellow called Alexander Dombrowski. I said, how did you get that name? He said, well, when he first came to Canada, the guy ahead of him in the line, they said, what's your name? And he said, Alexander Dombrowski. And when the Chinese guy came up, he said, what's your name? He said, same thing.
Frank, you're well comedian.
Nice one.
Yes, Frank. Yes, Frank.
But there's a true story. I worked with a lady her family came from Holland. And when they landed in Canada, she had this big, long Dutch name. And the Canadian taking the name said, no, we can't use that name in Canada. From now on, you'll be known as Audrey. So her name is Audrey, but that's not the name she came with. So things like that happen.
What's in the name?
Cassie, I wanted to check in with you. I hope I answered your question correctly or well.
with me, Gersha?
Yes.
Well, yeah. It wasn't a matter of correctly, but it was well answered, you know.
Okay.
I was wondering why you're closing off so early when normally we would go till 3, and there seems to be so much being said.
No, it's
I want to leave in a few minutes. I just want to tell everybody that on Tuesday we're doing RT's book launch in the Daybay Library. So I want to invite everybody who can't come, go on Zoom. Cassie, I'm sure you could reach on by the Daybay Library. You know, the normal Daybay hospitality would be extended. So you know, everybody please come down to the Daybay Library on Tuesday for 10:30.
Would love to, but not easy. The distance, you know, would be
we'll also be on Zoom as well. So if you can't make it in person, log on to the same Zoom site and you will be able to participate in our book launch.
Yeah, I suppose it will come by the invitation would be there'll be more invitation and email or something.
Yeah, Gersha, if you wouldn't mind.
If you send it to me, I'll email out the invitations.
Yeah, please do for me too, would you? The Zoom, so I can tune in. Because Ariti was here earlier today, very strangely enough, interviewing me as a writer, which I hadn't expected at all. But I know she's very excited about Tuesday.
Yes. Oh, that's nice.
RT is on Tuesday.
Yes, her book launch is on Tuesday. Heartstrings, I believe, is the name of the book.
10:30 at the Daybay Library.
Heartstrings, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. I have to.
Okay. Before you go, I just want to say, I want to give a shout out and a very happy birthday to a loved member of our group, Cynthia. Today is her birthday, so happy birthday from Poetry and Prose. I know you're off.
Happy birthday, Cynthia!
Happy birthday, Cynthia. We miss you today.
So I'm gonna change our view to gallery view if everyone can put on their videos, and we could say happy birthday to Cynthia. I would love for Mutilal to sing happy birthday, but all right.
Yeah, Moti, go ahead.
That's what I just big time singer, boy.
Let me go, Moti.
Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Cynthia.
Today we birthday to you. Thank you.
Happy birthday,
many more.
All right, and with that, we can
Very good, Gush. That was nice.
And with that, we
I
can go.
don't think we'll make it in Trinidad Has Talent.
I was
I hear you.
hoping Mutila would carry us now, just mime along. He used to do that in church, mime while everyone else sang. All righty, with that, we're going to close the session. Thank you. It's been a lovely Emancipation Day celebration.
Thank you very much, Gersha.
Thank you.
Thank
Cassie,
you
the
so
beard,
much. And thanks
Cassie,
for coming,
the beard
Cassie.
looks distinguished, boy.
So I'm going to close the meeting and open the parking lot for us now.
I am off to lunch.